Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and it's going to be another incredible episode today. Thanks, everyone, for joining me here today. Hope everyone has been doing well and has enjoyed your week at work and are gearing up for the holidays. I know we just got out of Halloween, but we now have Thanksgiving and Christmas right around the corner, so things are definitely going to start picking up here in the next few weeks with people shopping and whatnot. But family gatherings, I think, are going to definitely look very different this year due to this pandemic. And like I said, it's going to be a really good episode today. We'll touch on some recent news, some award show nominations, and everything in between. So we will get things going here, and I'll first open up with the recent news and hiring of AJ Hinch by the Detroit Tigers, and really unpack this and what this hire could mean for the Tigers moving forward. Later on, I'll discuss the recent nominations of numerous awards in the league that came out the other night and share who I think got a little shortchanged in the nomination selections and who I think will be the winners of those awards. And as we move out of that conversation, I want to get into discussing the different teams that could make the biggest moves in the offseason and which ball clubs could make some serious pushes to getting some very, very important players for their teams. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I will get into a topic that I don't think many people think about, which is whatever happened to player managers in baseball, why they don't exist anymore, and then did they, and if they were to exist, what kind of benefits or issues could they pose in today's world in baseball. So again, a jam-packed show with a lot of things to go over, but I want to stick right now in this first segment with the recent hiring of AJ Hinch over to the Detroit Tigers. And as we know, this is not the only hiring that's been very recent, as we had Tony La Russa not too long ago land in Chicago for the White Sox, and AJ Hinch, for those of you who don't know, he was the manager of the Astros when they were in the middle of that cheating scandal that took place, and he won a World Series with them in 2017. Very, very controversial World Series win. He's now the manager of the Detroit Tigers, and again, a lot of controversy and not the greatest reputation that he's going into Detroit with right now. And like I mentioned, Hinch comes to Detroit with experience managing besides his time in Houston, as he was the manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks for a season and a half, and where he didn't see as much success. He was not very good there. He only compiled an 89 and 123 overall record in 212 games over the 2009 season and half of the 2010 season. He actually has the lowest winning percentage as a non-interim manager in Diamondbacks history, with a .420 winning percentage. So again, not a whole lot of success initially as a manager, and probably back then, I don't know exactly who was on the team back then, probably did not have a whole lot of help. Now he goes over to Houston, and that's a totally different scenario. You come in and you've got Jose Altuve, Michael Brantley, Alex Bregman, you've got Carlos Correa, George Springer, and then as time went on, you add Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander, Zach Greinke. So you really start to kind of form, I don't want to say a super team, but a very, very talented and a very, very deep team as well. I mean, that's a very heavy lineup with a lot of very talented hitters in all sorts of spots, and then on top of it, you've got great pitching. So then again, he was hired by the Astros in 2015, and he turned them around from a struggling club to an actual competitive team. I mean, they were very, very poor back then when they were in the NL back, 5, 10, or I think they were actually in the AL at this point. But leading up to this, when they had been in the NL and they were in the NL Central, they were not very good. I mean, after that 2005 season where they went to the World Series, they really struggled. I mean, there was a period of time where they were arguably one of the worst teams in baseball. But then in 2015, Hinch took them to the wild card, which was their first playoff appearance in 10 years since going to the postseason in 2005. And they actually went past the wild card, beating the Yankees, and then they wound up losing in the ALDS to the Kansas City Royals, who we all know were the eventual World Series champions that year. And after a non-playoff appearance in 2016, the Astros, that's really when we start to see the dynasty of Houston start in, 20 2016, 2017 time, right around there, the Astros were back making a ton of noise in 2017 on the baseball diamond, making it all the way to the World Series that year. And as we know, they wound up winning over the Dodgers in a home run hitting frenzy. I mean, I remember watching the game and just sitting there thinking, wow, this almost feels like it's a home run derby. I mean, every single game, there must have been 4 or 5 home runs at least. And it was a very high offensive, output by both teams. And again, after that World Series, there was a lot of speculation that the Astros, they were well aware of what every single pitch was coming their way. And as a result, if you're a major league hitter and you're playing in the MLB and you know what's coming, you know what pitch is coming, it's going to make your life 50 times easier. You're going to be able to mentally prepare for that, and you're going to be able to adjust whenever, if it's a curveball, to wait on it a little bit. If it's a fastball and it's going to be down and in, or it's going to be down and away, whatever, you're going to know how to hit that. But and that's why there was so much controversy in this, because they were illegally using technology to steal signs, and as a result, they were, training themselves to know these signs, and then as a result, again, they're using different inanimate objects like banging on a trash can to relay that message over into the field for their players. So when you're the head of all this and when you're the manager of that, you're definitely going to get hit with at least a, guilt by association. Whether or not he knew or did not know, what was going on with this cheating and with this scandal, we have no idea. But we know that they were found guilty of doing this. We know that he was the manager during this, and for whatever reason, he, whether or not he knew or he did not know, he didn't do anything about it. And so as a result, your reputation now is going to probably carry over in a negative way when you seem to not really have any control over your team and what they're doing. And again, this World Series, that it became incredibly controversial. And Hinch was, as a result, released by the Astros as the manager in 2019 after the allegations that all came out about what all went on. And as a result, he received a year-long suspension from baseball starting in 2020. So he's been absent from baseball this past season, which shouldn't be a big deal in all honesty, because unlike La Russa, Hinch is not that old. He's young, and he's very up-to-date with the new style of baseball, so he will be able to easily adjust to the style of playing, and especially with a team like the Tigers, who I think are a big-time, up-and-coming team. They've got a lot of talent, and they've got a lot of pieces that they can work with. I think Hinch is going to be able to show people whether or not he is actually a good manager, or if that he just really benefited from this cheating style of play. Now, again, Hinch has experience in taking over struggling teams. It showed when he first took over the Astros and took them to a postseason berth for the first time in 10 seasons. So he's capable of doing a good job. He's going to inherit a solid team, I think, with good players. I mean, you've got Heimer Candelario. He's one of the players that I think is going to be a star in a couple years. He's one of the top hitters on Detroit's team last year, batted .297, 7 homers, 29 RBIs in 52 games. And then they also have some good experience. Jonathan Scoop, I mean, he's a very experienced infielder with a good bat as well, as he batted .278 with 23 RBIs. So they've got good players around the board. They did suffer at one point with having Jacoby Jones, who was at the time leading the team in many, I should say, major categories in hitting. He went down with an injury that I think really affected their season, but Hinch is no stranger in taking over these projects teams, if you will, kind of taking over, a team that you have a lot to work with. You've got a lot of things to look forward to. You've got a lot of pieces that you can work with and that you can build for the future. But this is what I'm curious about, and this is where I bring in my point of, are we going to start to see and kind of see Hinch exposed a little bit, at least his managerial skills, when he's in Detroit and he's aware that he cannot use cheating, he can't use sign stealing like how he was using it and how it was being used in Houston? Are we going to start to see potentially AJ Hinch, his actual managerial skills come to light, and we find out that he really is not good? And that the AJ Hinch in Arizona was the actual AJ Hinch as a manager that, did not have a good season. I mean, he did not have a good year and a half there in Arizona, and a lot of people feel that he benefited from this cheating scandal so much that it made him look really good. It made him look like he's a great manager. And I think the Tigers, they could be falling into that trap, or they could know something that everybody else on the outside is not aware of, that he is a very good baseball mind. And again, it showed in that first year. He was able to turn that team around, and I think Detroit is looking for somebody to turn this team around, and not to mention, a lot of these teams are going to want, like the White Sox, perfect example. They were initially going after somebody like AJ Hinch, who's actually a big candidate for them when they were looking for their new manager. They want somebody that's got experience in recent time, recent memory at the championship level. So that's AJ Hinch right there. He's got experience in the World Series multiple times. He's been out of baseball for a year, but he's been in baseball in relative time, and he knows the new trend of baseball. So he was, at one point or another, probably a very prime candidate for the Chicago White Sox. So the Detroit Tigers might be wanting to do something very similar. They're bringing in an experienced manager that has, again, he brings experience from a championship level, a championship caliber team, and he could potentially apply that over into Detroit. And, I mean, you've got not only Jonathan Scoop, you've got Heimer Candelario, and sure, Miguel Cabrera is aging a little bit, and he's getting a little bit older. And if he starts to retire, if he retires and he starts to really decline, I mean, in all honesty, that might not be a terrible thing. The Tigers could free up some payroll. They could maybe go after a free agent in maybe not necessarily this year, but in the future. And if they plan on having Hinch around for a long period of time, it could really turn into kind of a rebuild phase that I think the Tigers are now initially starting to see. I think this past season, the Detroit Tigers knew that, or they might have been surprised at the team that they had, and that the abilities that a lot of the guys had, and not only that, but the performance that they put on. I mean, the first month or so of baseball, they were hanging right there in the Central. I remember even talking about it on Golden State Media Comcast's baseball podcast. I remember saying, this is one of the most surprising teams in all of baseball. I would never have guessed this. And I think that they're kind of slowly building themselves up into having maybe kind of a short little window of time to win, like these other low to mid-major or low to mid-market teams in the MLB, similar to the Kansas City Royals or the Milwaukee Brewers, where they've got this finite amount of time to make a move. And I think AJ Hinch is a very good person and a great manager and a great baseball mind to bring into that. But again, is he going to be able to fix some of the problems that they've had? They've had problems with pitching. I mean, their closer, their closing last year was not great. It was not a very good outing from not only the relief pitching but also from just the starting pitching in general. I mean, it was a very, very, it was a quick burst of success for the Tigers to his start, and then they really started to plateau. And the other thing is, how is Hinch's reputation as a coach now and as a manager, which I'm sure in the baseball world and the baseball community is not really, well received, if you will, right now, just because of kind of the baggage he's coming into Detroit with? Is that going to follow with him? Is that going to possibly carry over and bleed over into Detroit, and it's going to affect his managing, it's going to affect the team, it could affect a lot of different things. And the other thing that I'm very curious about is, are we going to hear anything about sign stealing from the Tigers? Because when that all came out, right, we all knew and we all had a feeling that, there was players involved. It was more so kind of a couple people that were really the masterminds of it, Alex Cora being one of them, Carlos Beltran. I remember he was really, a big name in these reports. I believe Alex Bregman was a big name, Jose Altuve. A lot of them took immunity so they would not get in trouble for this, for their, their statements and everything else. But could, if this is a trend that goes into Detroit, could we now not only see, okay, there's a trend that follows this guy, but now we could probably guess that in Houston, he was most likely behind a lot of it, and there was other people that took the blame for it. And that is, I think, the problem. I think that we don't really know if he was in on it or not, and if that could, again, affect anything that's going on in Detroit. But when it comes to their pitching, I mean, that's a big thing that needs to gets fixed. I mean, Joe Jimenez, in his new role as a closer this past year in 2020, again, he would really come out of the bullpen mainly as a relief guy, a setup guy. This was really his first experience, in a sense, being a closer, and he did not perform great. I mean, sure, he had 5 saves, but that was about it. I mean, he had a 7.15 ERA, and their entire, starting lineup, their entire starting rotation was abysmal. I mean, they had one guy that was throwing under a 4 ERA, Spencer Turnbull. He was the only one in a 3.97 ERA, so he was right there at 4. But then after that, I mean, you've got Matthew Boyd, he had a 6.71 ERA. You have Tariq Skubal, who had a 5.63 ERA. Casey Mize, he had a 6.99 ERA, and these guys are starting, multiple games. Michael Fulmer, he had a 8.78 ERA. There was only 3 pitchers on the Detroit Tigers staff that started 10 or more games. And out of those three, Spencer Turnbull is the only one to have that sub-4 ERA. Matthew Boyd and Casey Mize being the other two Michael Fulmer and Matthew Boyd being the other two. And again, neither one of them had anything lower than a 6 ERA. So they've got a lot of things to work out with in terms of the pitching. But their overall lineup is not that bad. Again, Heimer Candelario, he does a lot for you. Jonathan Scoop, he does a lot for you. And really, as we kind of go down the line a little bit, Willy Castro, he was a nice piece for them over at shortstop. Coming off the bench, he batted .349, 36 games he played in, 24 RBIs. He actually had the most RBIs out of any kind of reserve bench player on Detroit's team. And he was, one of 4 or 5 guys on the team that had 20 or more RBIs. So they do have some pieces. They do have some players that are capable of being very, very good. It's just a whether or not AJ Hinch is going to bring that out of them. Is he going to be able to turn this team around who finished, 23-35 in fifth place in the AL Central? And if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of the year, they had a totally different kind of feel to them. I mean, they were coming out of the gates really hot. They played great baseball through the first first 8 games of July. They only lost 3 games. I mean, they're 5-3 going into August. So, and then, things kind of started to build from there. They had a really, really long, 5, 6, 7 game losing streak in the middle of August that definitely set them back a little bit. So things like that cannot occur, and especially under AJ Hinch's watch. I mean, if you have him really coming in and not doing a whole lot and not really having any sort of impact on this team, you're the Detroit Tigers. You've got to question, should we keep this Hinch guy around or not? So I think this year is going to be very interesting to see how Hinch is in this new role with the Tigers. If we see any sort of other accusations about sign stealing, if we see whether or not Hinch is actually a good manager or if he was just a product of cheating and he was, a beneficiary of other, players and coaches and whomever else getting in on this scandal and getting in on this kind of cheating regimen, if you will, of trying to steal signs in an illegal way. Who knows? But I think that there's going to be a lot of questions answered in this, and I think that, dissimilar to the La Russa hire, I think this hire is very, I don't want to say, because La Russa hire is not a bad hire. I think that's a great hire for them. But in terms of new style of baseball and personnel that know that new style of baseball and are able to coach in that style, I think AJ Hinch you have to side with a little bit more because he's been more involved in baseball in recent memory as opposed to Tony La Russa, who, as we know, after 2011 retired from managing, and then he got into some front office stuff with baseball. But in terms of being down on the field, La Russa has not had the recent experience that AJ Hinch has. So who knows? Maybe we see the Detroit, and again, it's very interesting that these two teams, they're in the same division. They're in the AL Central together. So we'll have to see. We're going to be able to compare them side by side. Which team is going to do better with their new manager? Will it be the White Sox or will it be the Tigers? I think there's going to be, again, a lot of questions answered, and at the end of the day, it's going to be an interesting situation in Detroit because I think this Tigers team is aware they have something special on their team, and that with the right leadership and players continuing to develop, they could be a real solid team. If not next year, then the year after that, because they do have those good position players, like I mentioned. They've got guys off the bench. They just need to fix that pitching. That pitching is what needs to really be a focus for them. And Hinch comes from a team that had experience with dominating pitching, so maybe he can bring that aspect with him to Detroit and help to either acquire or develop guys in their bullpen and rotation to really bolster this pitching staff. We'll have to see, but I am very, very excited for not only seeing AJ Hinch at his new position, but also Tony La Russa, seeing how these two new managers in their two new positions at the helm for their respective teams, how these not only, again, how the managers do, but how the teams do overall. So that'll do it for us in our first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'll discuss the nominees for the different season awards and mention who should have been nominated and who I think will be the winners of these awards. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I discussed the recent hiring of AJ Hinch by the Detroit Tigers and what it means for the team moving forward. Be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show as I'll share my insight into what happened to player managers and why they don't exist anymore. I want to now get into the recent nominations of the regular season accolades, as the nominees for the MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, and Manager of the Year were announced on Monday, and there were a lot of big-time names and players nominated for the different awards, but there are a few players I feel like were kind of snubbed out of these awards. So I'll start off with the Manager of the Year, and over in the AL, the three finalists is Kevin Cash for the Tampa Bay Rays, Rick Renteria, who's no longer with Chicago White Sox, but he was their manager this past year, and then Charlie Montoyo, who is the manager for the Toronto Blue Jays. So Kevin Cash, he's a prime example of hard work pays off. He came to Tampa in 2015, and ever since then, he has steadily built this team into the World Series contender that they were this past season. In his first year with the Rays, they were a below 500 team. They weren't that great, which would be a theme from about 2015 to 2018 when they were finally able to make it above 500, finishing with a .556 winning percentage. And then in 2019, they finished second in the AL East and lost in the ALDS. But then this year, which was the best year the team performed while being led by Cash, they made it all the way to the World Series, and they were just 2 games away from winning it all and capturing their first ever World Series title. He's been a great manager for the Rays for the most part. It's been, again, in recent memory, he's been a lot better than it was in the beginning, but he's really turned this team around, which should show why he's deserving of this award. He would probably be my favorite for this award. If I was voting for this award, I'd probably give it to Kevin Cash because, again, he really turned this team around. But Rick Renteria, he's another guy that I want to talk about because I think that he's really, neck and neck with Kevin Cash, because to the life of me, I still don't understand why Renteria and the White Sox decided to part ways after the incredible season they just had. Unless there is something, more to it that we on the outside are not aware of, whatever it might be. Regardless, Renteria improved his team's win total from 2018 to 2019 by 10. And this year he guided them to their first playoff appearance since 2008 and their best winning percentage as a team since 2005. Although they didn't finish the way they wanted to, he still took this team to heights they hadn't seen in many years, which for me I think is pretty deserving of this award, but it's going to be hard to compete with the manager who went to the World Series. I think it's going to be a neck and neck there with him and Cash. But again, Renteria really, he changed this White Sox team. And I think that they're aware of the position that they're in now. And if they go very far next year with La Russa at the helm, I think they'd have to thank Renteria for that because I think he has set them up very, very well for the future. And then the last finalist in the AL, Charlie Montoyo, the Blue Jays, they made an incredible turnaround from a 95-loss season in 2019 to making the playoffs in 2020. So a huge turn of events for Toronto. They actually had their first winning season since 2016. So again, another manager that took his team to new levels, or levels they haven't seen in many years, which is a legitimate reason to give him the award. But will it be enough? That's the question. Did he go far enough, and did he do enough for him to win the award? Ultimately, I think the winner will be Kevin Cash. I think we could see Renteria winning it as well. Montoyo had a great year in Toronto, but I don't think it was enough for the award. Kevin Cash, in my opinion, will ultimately be the winner. Now, over in the NL, Don Mattingly for the Marlins, David Ross for the Cubs, and then Jace Tingler for the Padres. Don Mattingly, I think, has done a really nice job with this team, and he's been slowly turning them around over the last few years. Although they haven't seen a winning record under Mattingly until this year. Again, quite some time that they had been, they've been under Mattingly's control, I think, since 2015. So, last 5 years it's been kind of a struggle, but it's been a slow grind uphill for them. And he brings a lot of success with him. That's the other thing about Mattingly. He's been the manager of the Dodgers, where he had 3 straight 90-plus win seasons, and the former Yankee great finally had a breakthrough with the Marlins this year. He took them to their first winning season since 2009, and he also guided them to their first playoff appearance since 2003 and their first series win in the playoffs since 2003. So a lot of achievements Mattingly checked off this year, not to mention he had to deal with a huge COVID-19 outbreak on his team, and they were still able to persevere through all of that. Somehow, some way, they were able to fight through that whole debacle that they had earlier on in the year. I think it was up to almost 20 cases that they had on the team at one point. So again, being able to maneuver through that and being able to come out of that and still make the playoffs and actually win a round of the playoffs, that says a lot about him for a manager, I think. Next guy, obviously, David Ross. I mean, as a first-year manager, Ross definitely, put himself into this conversation for helping the Cubs get back to the playoffs and win the Central. They were 34-26 over the 60-game season, and unfortunately, they lost in the first round of the playoffs. But he helped this team, have a very solid year. I will say, it didn't take a whole lot to win the division. I mean, considering the fact that the division was one of the worst in baseball all year long, if not the worst, it did not take a whole lot of effort, I feel, for him to win that with the Cubs. But again, really nice job in his first year as a manager. And then Jace Tingler, very similar to Ross, another first-year manager, but he helped the Padres get back to the postseason for the first time since 2006. But he also guided them to their best winning percentage in a season in franchise history. Very impressive stuff. Not to mention, he was huge in building this team into a power hitting force, one of the best lineups in all of baseball, one of the best hitting teams in baseball, and they made it to the NLDS, and they won their first playoff series since 1998 when they won the NLDS against the Astros. So again, new heights the Padres haven't seen in years were reached because of Tingler. Honestly, I would have to go with either Mattingly or Tingler. I think that they have, they'd have to be two of my better choices, but I'm going to go with Mattingly in this one. He really pulled them out of the bottom of the division after years of being one of the worst teams in baseball, and they were coming off of a 105-loss season last year. So he had a major part in helping them improve from literally one of the worst teams in baseball, being one of, I think, 2 or 3 teams last year to have over 100 losses, to being in the playoffs. That's a ginormous turnaround. Talk about going from worst to first. That is literally the epitome of it. Now, getting into the next award, the Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go through the NL candidates. First off, Alec Bohm, Jake Cronenworth, and Devin Williams. Alec Bohm from the Phillies, Jake Cronenworth from the Padres, and then Devin Williams from the Brewers. Alec Bohm, I mean, he was incredible all year long. In the 44 games he appeared in for the Phils, he batted an astonishing .338 with a .481 slugging percentage, 23 RBIs, and 4 home runs. So a really great stat line for someone who played a majority of the games in his rookie year. He actually led the team in batting average amongst players who played at least 40 games. Not to mention, he had 136 OPS plus, and his .338 average was good for 6th in the NL. Pretty astounding numbers if you ask me. Now, Jake Cronenworth, I mean, hitting-wise, had one of the biggest impacts on this Padres team. That was a top 5 hitting team this past year, and if he was really a major factor into that as a rookie, imagine what he's going to be doing in 4 or 5 years. He had an .831 OPS and a .285 average. Again, not as good as Bohm, but he still put up really good numbers. And Cronenworth, he was heading into September with a .356 average and a .624 slugging percentage. Again, he cooled off some, but I would say Cronenworth was pretty incredible for the Padres this season. And then Devin Williams, honestly, without question, I think this is the winner. I think this is the NL Rookie of the Year. I mean, the stats are just too much, in my opinion. 0.33 ERA, only allowed 1 single earned run all year long in the 27 innings he appeared in. He had an incredible strikeout mark, 53 total Ks in 27 innings. 53 Ks in 27 innings. 2 Ks an inning just about. Over 2 Ks an inning just about. That's an incredibly staggering stat line. I would really be confused if he didn't win. I mean, probably, it would probably bother me a little bit because the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, I don't think you can really get much better than that, especially in a sample size that is a legitimate amount of time. I mean, that's a fair sample size. 27 innings as a relief guy, and you're striking out that high of a volume of batters. That's really hard to do. So I would have Williams winning without question. I mean, he completely shut down all batters this year, could not touch him, so he would be my winner for the NL, Rookie of the Year. Now, going over to the AL, you've got Christian Javier, you've got Kyle Lewis, and you've got Luis Robert. You've got Christian Javier, again, from the Astros, Lewis from the Mariners, and then Robert from the White Sox. Javier had an awesome year. I mean, he went, with a 3.48 ERA and a 0.99 WHIP in the 12 appearances, and he had 54 Ks in 54 in the third innings. That's not too bad. That's pretty solid stat line for a rookie. Again, someone who's coming in with not much experience at all, and he stepped right up, especially with the Astros losing Cole to free agency last year, and then Verlander went down with a season-ending injury. Having Javier step up and really perform in a much-needed spot, I think moving forward is, this is going to only be the beginning of a really great career for him. I think he's going to have a very long-lasting time in the major leagues. And who knows? I mean, in the next couple of years, he might be one of the dominating arms in all of baseball. Then Kyle Lewis, I mean, he would probably be my favorite to win the award. He not only has a great bat, but he's got an incredible glove. He batted .262 for the season. He tied the league lead in homers amongst rookies with 11, and he knocked in 28 RBIs, which was second amongst all rookies in the MLB as well, and he was second on his team in that stat. So not to mention, he was one of only 2 players in the starting lineup for the Mariners this year to hit an 800 OPS or higher. So a skilled fielder with a great bat. I mean, I think he's the most well-rounded out of these candidates, without question. And then you also have Luis Robert, who, again, I was very, very wrong about him. He did have an up-and-down year, I will say. But at the point that I had seen him, he wasn't doing a whole lot. And then all of a sudden, he just kind of flipped the switch, and he was playing really well. And he was really the only other one to tie Lewis for the league lead in homers by rookies, and he was the league leader in RBIs amongst all rookies with 31. So again, Lewis was second to him in that stat. Now, Robert did bat 30 points lower than Lewis did for an average, and he was about 60 to 70 points below Lewis in OPS. Really, Robert only had Lewis beat in one category. I think Robert is a very good player. I think he's definitely, again, proven me very wrong. Definitely better than I originally thought he was. But I think Lewis was the best rookie without question. So I have Kyle Lewis winning the AL Rookie of the Year. Now, getting into the Cy Young Awards, this is where we're really starting to kind of heat up with these accolades and everything. Cy Young for the AL, Shane Bieber for the Indians, Kenta Maeda for the Twins, and then Hyun-Jin Ryu for the Blue Jays. Shane Bieber, I mean, what is there to say? There isn't much you can say that it was negative about Bieber's year. Sure, he had a tough outing in one game in the playoffs, but are we really going to judge his entire season off of one single game? The guy wins the Triple Crown in pitching for the entire MLB. Not just, obviously in the AL, but also in the entire MLB. So he was, without question, the most dominating pitcher in the MLB. With a league-high 122 Ks, he was tied for the league lead in wins with 8, and the league lead in ERA with a 1.63 clip, not to mention a league-high 281 ERA+. I mean, the guy was untouchable all year long. He had double-digit Ks in the first 2 outings of the year, a 13 strikeout performance and a 14 strikeout performance. So pretty incredible if you ask me. I mean, those are very, very hard stats to put up, especially with the surrounding environment and the surrounding circumstances with this pandemic, and he was able to persevere through that in the first game or two, again, in the end of July, and you're able to come out that ready. That's pretty impressive. Then Kenta Maeda, coming from the Dodgers during the offseason, Maeda made an immediate impact on a team that I personally think was still figuring out their ace until Maeda arrived, because he's really taken on that role after this season. With a league-high 0.75 whip and 80 Ks over 66 and 2/3 innings, efficiency was the name of the game for Maeda. He only had 10 walks, so an 8-to-1 K to walk ratio is pretty incredible, and not to mention a 161 ERA+. Not quite the numbers of Bieber, but still very impressive nonetheless. And then Hyun-Jin Ryu, with a career-high 9.7 Ks per 9 innings and a 2.69 ERA, Ryu was back to his old self in 2020, very similar to how he played in 2019, where he was the runner-up for the NL Cy Young last year. Very impressive stuff. He had a really, really great year last year, and he was continuing it on this year. He had 72 Ks in 67 innings, and the efficiency of getting through innings and having a high strikeout number while not even collecting 70 innings should speak volume to the level of pitching that Ryu displayed this year. I just don't think it's enough to beat out Bieber at all. Shane Bieber, is the only one, maybe Maeda, but Bieber without question would win the award. So I've got for the AL Cy Young Award winner, Shane Bieber. Now over to the NL for the Cy Young, you have Trevor Bauer from the Reds, Yu Darvish from the Cubs, and then Jacob Degrom from the Mets. Bauer had a phenomenal year without question. He led the NL in ERA with a 1.73 ERA. He had over 100 Ks on the year and got it all done in 73 innings. He also had a league-high 2 complete games and 2 shutouts. He was stellar all season. He had 9 of his 11 starts registering as quality starts. So he's going the distance, and he's minimizing as many runs as possible. Not to mention an NL-high 2.76 ERA+. Those are some staggering numbers to put up in a season. And Yu Darvish, he had a great year himself, too. He was tied for the league lead in wins with 8. The Cubs hurler also had a great season with a 2.01 ERA and 93 Ks. And Darvish had a big improvement from last year. Again, his ERA was not bad. He was right under 4, 3.98. Probably not where people expect it to be with the caliber of pitching that he brings. This year, hovering around 2 all year long, and not to mention attributing to a quarter of the Cubs' wins this year. So, a ginormous impact. A huge impact he had on the mound for the Cubs, without question. And then finally, Jacob Degrom, the back-to-back winner of this award. And he continued that on. I mean, this year he continued that trend. There's no shock that he would probably be back with this, being nominated for this award, not only because of his track record, but also because of the season he had. He had a 2.38 ERA, so again, not as great and as stellar as, Bauer, very close to Darvish for the most part. But again, nonetheless, an incredible ERA to have, a very impressive ERA. And he had the second most Ks in the league, first most in the NL with 104. Not to mention, and this was very interesting that I noticed, he was the only pitcher to strike out 100-plus hitters this year in under 70 innings. So when you talk about efficiency, that's Degrom to a T. The quickness in which he was moving through these innings was, without question, incredible, to say the least. With it being his, again, second straight year of leading the NL in Ks, it's without any sort of doubt that he is making a great case for the award. But will it be enough? Again, that's the big question. Will that be enough, especially with how well Bauer pitched this year? Honestly, the winner for this one is a toss-up for me. I would say Bauer because of the fact he had similar numbers to Degrom, but he had a whole ERA lower than Degrom. So, again, I'm probably going to go with Bauer on this one, but I would not be shocked if Yu Darvish actually made a big-time case for himself also. Again, the numbers were not too dissimilar, not too off from Bauer and Degrom for Darvish. So I think that'll be one of the closest races for all of these awards in baseball. Now, getting into the final award, MVP, we're going to jump into the NL first. We've got Mookie Betts for the Dodgers, Freddie Freeman for the Braves, and then Manny Machado for the Padres. That was very interesting when I saw that. Betts, this is in foreign territory for Betts. I mean, he's won this award before in the AL in 2018. He's received votes for the award since 2015. So a consistently top-tier player each and every year. What makes him so good is his ability on the base path. And again, his versatility as a player in all regards. I mean, he had a team-high 10 steals, and his defense is impeccable. One of the best right fielders in all of baseball, and actually he was just recently given another Gold Glove. I believe it's his fifth straight Gold Glove, his first in the NL. So a great base runner, a great fielder, and a phenomenal hitter. I mean, in the leadoff spot, second hole, third hole, if you've got Mookie Betts in those 1 through 3 spots in the lineup, you can at least hope that he'll get on base, and you probably have a lot of confidence that he will too. As being that high up in the lineup, you probably want him to be on base very early and often. Then it makes things so much easier for 4, 5, 6, 7 hitters for this Dodgers team. I mean, they'd probably be licking their chops, seeing that, okay, we've got Betts on first or second, we maybe get another guy on, and then all of a sudden you've got Bellinger and Turner and Jock Peterson and Corey Seager, and the list goes on. Now it's just setting he does such a great job, Mookie Betts that is, at setting himself up for his teammates to drive him in. And he had a .292 average with 16 homers and 39 RBIs. Another fantastic year, and putting up those numbers when you're hitting that high up in the lineup, that's, again, a very essential factor to have in a team's success. And as we see in this past year, it definitely paid off. Freddie Freeman, again, talk about a monster year for him. Let's just start with the fact that he had over an 1,100 OPS, and he had 13 homers with a league-high 23 doubles. Freeman was a ginormous part of Atlanta's incredible playoff run into the league championship, and not to mention he had a career high in OPS, plus with, or an OPS plus with a 186 total. Being a career high with that and above an 1,100 OPS, pretty phenomenal numbers to put up. He was also second in the NL in WAR amongst position players at 2.9, and he was tied for first with his teammate Marcelo Zuna in runs created. So a very impressive year for Freeman, to say the least. And then Manny Machado, talk about a tale of 2 seasons for Machado. Pretty incredible, because he was hitting nearly 200 for most of August before really turning things around to eventually hitting 304 on the year with 16 homers and 47 RBIs and a 950 OPS. He was 7th in the NL in OPS plus with 158, so Machado had a very strong season after starting off incredibly slow, but he was able to turn things around. Now, my winner for this award, it's going to be close. I think Betts will win with how well he played all year and all the way into the World Series. He really carried it all the way through. But if you look at the other two, they technically had better overall numbers than Betts did. I think, in my opinion, my personal opinion, Freddie Freeman wins the award. He had such a good year. You can't ignore it. And although, Betts did play further along into the season than Freddie Freeman, wasn't by a whole lot. Again, Freddie Freeman made it to the NLCS. So I think Freeman and Betts are probably the front runners. I don't know why Machado was thrown into that. When I get to the end of this segment, I'll mention a couple guys that I feel like were snubs out of these awards. And one of these guys I feel like was a massive snub, and quite frankly, I don't understand why his name wasn't on the finalist list. Now, my final segment, or my final, selection and final, award, the AL MVP, The finalists are Jose Abreu for the White Sox, DJ LeMahieu for the Yankees, and then Jose Ramirez for the Indians. Abreu, I mean, man, what a year this guy had. He was the 2014 Rookie of the Year in 2014, so 6 years ago. He looked like he was 10 times better than that performance he put up in 2014, which was an incredible season he had with 36 homers and 107 RBIs. But this year, Abreu was on an absolute tear. I mean, he had an AL high 76 hits with a league high 60 RBIs, so he was well on to pace over 100 RBIs, probably would have crushed the 107 RBIs he put up in 2014. Not to mention, he had the second most homers in the league as well with 19 homers, second to only Luke Voit. He also led all the majors in total bases with 148, and he was first in the AL in slugging percentage with a 617%. So if that isn't enough proof that he should win this award, then I don't know what is. I mean, he's a clear-cut favorite, in my opinion, for the award. DJ LeMahieu, though, he's continued to rake for the Bronx Bombers. He only had 10 homers and 27 RBIs, which are still great numbers to put up, especially as a middle infielder, and he led the entire MLB in batting average at .364, and he also led the AL in OBP with a .421% and OPS with a 1.011%. So nothing short of amazing for LeMahieu, but I don't think this will be enough to beat Abreu. Even though both of them were very good, I think Abreu's got him just beat by barely a little bit. Jose Ramirez, I think that he's got the lowest chance of winning out of the three. He did lead the AL in runs with 45, and he batted a career-best .993 OPS on the year, but he was pretty much non-existent for much of the year until September, which seemed to be, again, a complete change in his season. He started off hot and seemed to really decline as we entered into August, which his average actually dipped down to .230 in the end of August. He was able to bring it back up into September. I just don't think his numbers are any better than Abreu's in any regard. Sure, he had a good year, but I think Abreu was the biggest difference maker out of these three players, especially on the team he was on. So I would have to go with Abreu by a long shot, again, followed by LeMahieu, and then probably put, Ramirez at third. Abreu put on a show. I mean, he put on an absolute show. And if he does not win, I feel like he would be completely robbed of the award. I would personally feel that he was very, very, very robbed of the award because he was very well deserving of it. So I've got a couple snubs that I feel like should have been on these lists. First one, Marcelo Zuna. I don't know how or why he's not on that list. I think he had a better year than Manny Machado did in a lot of different regards. I mean, I'm pretty sure he batted near .340 for the season. So, again, almost 40 points higher than what Manny Machado hit, and he led the NL in home runs and RBIs. He's one of my big snubs. Dinelson Lamet for the NL Cy Young. I mean, we could call him a snub, and I'm calling him a snub because I was a big fan of Lamet this year, and I felt like he had a really, really good season. He was top 5, top 10 in ERA, strikeouts, a lot of different major pitching categories. I just don't think he was right there with, Darvish, Degrom, Bauer. I mean, those were top-tier pitchers, without question. And then my final snub that I think that was absolutely completely robbed was Juan Soto. I mean, he literally led the NL in OBP, slugging percentage, OPS, I believe in batting average as well. I mean, he led the NL in a lot of major hitting categories by a mile, too. I mean, he had... I don't, and again, I probably would have to look this up, but probably one of the most incredible 60-game spans of baseball ever played in at least the last 10 or 20 years. I mean, he was on a tear. And I feel like those three definitely got a little shortchanged, at least Soto and Ozuna the most. But nonetheless, I think these were good selections. I think they're great nominees, and I think that we're going to find out very soon, obviously, who's going to win. And when it does come out, I'll be sure to come back on the show and give my two cents on it and kind of my thoughts on who was robbed, who wasn't robbed, who I would have probably gone with as opposed to who, is actually chosen, so on and so forth. So, again, keep your eyes and ears open for those winners of those awards because I think it's going to be a down-to-the-wire finish for a couple of them. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the break, I'm going to get into discussing which teams I think could make some serious moves next year and heading into this offseason, what they could and could not do. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we've got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenour again, and in the last segment, I got into sharing the different nominees for the regular season awards and which players I think will win, and then also naming a few snubs I felt were very deserving of being nominated for these awards. I want to now jump into discussing which teams I think will make some big-time moves in the offseason and what pieces they may try to add. So as we know, there is a big free agency upon us with a lot of talented players entering the market. So it makes me wonder, who could make the biggest moves? And I think there are a few teams that are going to make some huge moves that could really pay dividends for them. So the first team I want to discuss is the Red Sox. I think they're a very intriguing case. And this is a team I think that is secretly plotting some major moves. They really need to go after the pitching, obviously, with a good portion of their rotation from the 2018 championship team. Not with the team anymore. David Price now in LA, Ricky Porcello now with the Mets. But they also have to fear they could lose Jackie Bradley Jr. to free agency, who tends to be an all-right hitter, but a fantastic fielder. Someone that is much needed in the lineup, especially on the defensive side. A theme we are starting to see, and the Red Sox have already started to do that, is these teams are starting to free up their financial plan a little bit by releasing different players with smaller contracts, not only to make room for big free agents, but to also absorb a little bit of the hit they'll take financially this year. I think pitching and the center field position are the two places they'll really attack. They could also look to boost the second base position some, as the two main second basemen on their team both hit 250 and below. So they could go after guys like DJ LeMahieu. That would be very interesting to see him, get added to that Red Sox lineup. And again, they can pay for him. And if they don't re-sign Bradley, maybe they go after George Springer, somebody like that, another big name on the market who has proven to be a great hitter and a fielder. So that could be an option. But I think that, what they should really go after is the pitching. Since they are freeing up room to pay players larger salaries, they'll have no problem going after big-name free agents like Trevor Bauer. Again, I've mentioned this many times. I think Trevor Bauer would work great on a Boston Red Sox team, mainly because of the fact that they've got already a great pitcher, great number one option that will be back in 2021 in Chris Sale. And if you've got Sale and Bauer as your 1-2 punch right there, good luck in the AL East. That's going to be a doozy to get through. All in all, this Red Sox team is going to make some serious moves, I think. I've been saying this for a while. I think the moves they made, were to keep thinking ahead, really. And sure, they really suffered this year with their worst season since 1965, but I think they are building for the future and preparing for another big run towards the World Series. So the next team I want to discuss is the White Sox. Now, this will be an interesting scenario that plays out in Chicago because they have started to free up some room on their payroll to, possibly make room for potentially a huge acquisition in the offseason. They first declined Edwin Encarnacion's $12 million option for next year, so that's a little bit more wiggle room that they can play around with. They also declined Gio Gonzalez's option for $7 million, so a lot of moving around has been done by the White Sox. They have a great reliefman in Alex Colomé. That is going to be a free agent, actually, this offseason. But I'm sure they are going to want to re-sign since he's such a talented pitcher. He was incredible for them this past year and the year before. And I think pitching and the designated hitter position will be two options that the White Sox try to go after. I think it's safe to say that, again, Trevor Bauer is on every single team's radar this offseason with his openness to, going to any ball club, with his willingness to, sign one-year contracts for the rest of his career. So, again, that opens the door for anybody. But this is a strong pitching core with Giolito and Keuchel being the two main staples of the rotation. And you bring in someone like Trevor Bauer, you just know he's going to make an immediate impact. And honestly, he can really boost this pitching staff. In their starting rotation, only one pitcher had 50 or more Ks this year, which was Giolito, who had 97 Ks. And he had a great ERA, right under 3.5 ERA. So, he was a high strikeout, low ERA guy for the most part. Right what you want, and exactly what Trevor Bauer was this past season too. So they definitely need a big strikeout pitcher who can really go the distance in games and try to heighten this rotation. And another position they may want to go after, like I mentioned, is the designated hitter position. And this brings me to my next point. One of my favorite players this year, mainly because of how well he performed in a new role and really took the NL by storm, and that is Marcelo Zuna. He's going to be a free agent this offseason, and if the NL is possibly thinking of going back to, no designated hitter, he's going to want to leave the NL because he's clearly thrived in that role of a designated hitter. Not having to play every day in the lineup can definitely save his body a little bit and try and, focus on hitting and only hitting. So that opens up a lot of opportunity for him in the AL. He could fit right in this team with his power hitting ability, and if you add him with Jose Abreu and Eloy Jimenez, that's a big three-headed hitting monster right there in Chicago. All three guys hitting over, 14 homers or more this past season. So again, a lot of power right behind that. And then again, all three of them hit over 40 RBIs. I'm pretty sure Ozuna had just under 60, Abreu had 60, and Jimenez had 40-41. So they're all 40 and more RBI guys in 60 games. That's a lot of RBIs. So the White Sox are on the verge of something big, I think. They are in this short window right now where they can really make a run, and I think they see this opportunity that they have, and they don't want this window of time to close. And they notice that, so they'll probably want to capitalize on this time before the moment passes. And ultimately, I think that they could really, do some serious damage, especially in this AL Central. I mean, they showed it this past year, and on top of it, I think the Twins are a vulnerable team. I think that is, again, if they lose Nelson Cruz, their hitting is wide open. They've got really nobody in that lineup that has done anything. Now, they've got great pitching for the most part, so that definitely helps them out. And then with the Indians, kind of the same deal. I think that out of those three teams, you have to put the White Sox as the number one hitting team out of all three of them, without question. And sure, the Indians have great pitchers, but I would say that the White Sox could argue that, again, if they get Trevor Bauer, I think they would surpass them, and they could potentially become the best team in the AL Central, without question. So it'll be interesting to see what the White Sox do. My next team I want to talk about, the Milwaukee Brewers. And I know I'm a big fan of this team, but I will say I've been really liking the moves they are making so far. As they've already declined Ryan Braun's option, he's a free agent for the first time in his career, and the same thing with Ben Gamel, Jed Jerko, and Eric Sogard, which is semi-ironic because a couple of the guys they went after in the offseason last year, like Sogard and Jerko and Justin Smoke, are all not with the team anymore. I think they are also prepping to, go all in, if you will, this season, mainly because those 3 or 4 guys are no longer on the roster. And this could allow them to make some moves for some hitting, or better yet, pitching, that they really, really need. Josh Hader, again, heads to arbitration this year, and with a hole over at, the third base, now with Sogard gone, makes you wonder if they'll stick with Hader and maybe go after a third baseman, or, if they let Hader walk and then go after some other potential options like a Mark Melancon, who's an experienced closer, who'll be a free agent. He's pitched in big-time games in the past. And, again, it wouldn't be any sort of a downgrade from Hader, in my opinion. And then over at third base, they could go after someone like Justin Turner. I know that sounds a little ridiculous since he just won the World Series with the Dodgers, but let's not forget, there was another third baseman that came to the Brewers after winning a World Series, and he became a free agent, and his name was Mike Moustakas. And they had a huge run all the way to the NLCS when he arrived. So it is possible. Again, anything is possible, and I think that is something that could very well happen because, Justin Turner is 36. He's getting a little older, so he might want a lot of money, but he couldn't really argue, in my opinion, for a huge contract because he's 36 years old. He's getting older. Unless if they transitioned him to a DH, but if the NL doesn't do that, he's not really an option in the NL, in my opinion. So again, it's possible, but who knows? And they'll obviously have Yelich till 2029, and then Kane isn't a free agent for another few years. So the outfield, for the most part, is set. But who will they go after in left field with Braun not there anymore? That will be another big question mark, I think, this season for them to really answer. And if they really save their money, maybe get Hader a new contract in some way, then they could go after another really good hitter in the outfield, like a Michael Brantley. But the problem, again, is with their payroll being at a mid-market, low market level. They won't be able to spend a crazy amount of money on multiple people. They'll have to be strategic with their money, dealing with their finances and everything else, because they could very well make some moves in the offseason if they are smart and strategic with what they are doing. So the next team that I want to discuss that I think could, again, we're only down to 2 more teams that I think can make some big moves, but these teams could make some pivotal moves in the offseason. The Blue Jays. I mean, the Blue Jays have really surfaced into the news recently as one of the big-time landing spots for Trevor Bauer, as he would clearly add to their staff, that features a Cy Young finalist this year in Hyun-Jin Ryu. And then again, they also picked up Robbie Ray. I mean, he was all right. But this is a very deep team, and they have plenty of talent that is coming up through their system, as they actually have one of the top minor league systems in baseball. And this is another team I think that can really bolster the third base position a little bit, as they currently have Travis Shaw, who batted below 240 and really hasn't had a good, really a great year since 2017. So a third baseman will probably be a focus for them. But again, I go back to the pitching, because after Ryu, they didn't have one pitcher in the starting rotation that started, that had started 10 or more games that had below a 4 ERA, as both Tanner Roark and Chase Anderson were both above a 6 ERA. So they had a lot of guys that did not pitch very well at all. So adding a pitcher like Bauer, or even bringing back someone like Marcus Stroman. I know he was with the Blue Jays a few years back, and he'll be a free agent again this year. And they did add some good pieces at the trade deadline with acquiring Tawan Walker. So that, they did add some good pitching there. They brought in Robbie Ray, but again, he wasn't great last year. Definitely improved from the first half of the year to the second half of the year. I do believe there is something brewing in Toronto, and they are on the verge of something huge without question. It'll just be interesting to see, what they do in the offseason coming up. But again, they've got a young core of guys. Bo Bichette's a great shortstop. Vlad Jr., I mean, we all know the potential he's got. He just needs to put it together. And I think that, again, he's coming to the league very young. And I think people are kind of, now that I think about it, a little impatient with his development, because people don't realize, he's played great. I mean, especially at his age and for how long he's been in the majors. But the problem is, I think everybody is expecting him to be like his dad. And it's obviously going to take him a little bit of time to get used to the speed and the level of the game, especially if he's being pretty much thrusted into a starting role. But I think that he's got a bright future ahead of him. Bo Bichette's got a bright future ahead of him. They've got some great prospects. I think that we've got something interesting, brewing and really kind of bubbling up in Toronto. I'm excited to see the future up for the Blue Jays. My final team that I want to talk about, and that I think could make some moves, which I think is a bit of a reach maybe, because just with the team they have, they might be set with it. But the Angels, mainly because of the fact that they had a disappointing year this past season, but they made big moves in last year's offseason with getting Anthony Rendon, and they have a large payroll, so they can go out and pay for players if they have to. And again, another team that could go after Bauer, they had the 26th worst team ERA this past season. So they clearly need help with the pitching. That is a clear void they need to fill. Obviously, I think, besides Dylan Bundy, they didn't have a whole lot of help with their ERA, and it was clear. I mean, if you're in the final 20, your ERA as a team is not good at all. And I think they could even go after some outfielders, too. They only had Trout hitting above 250 in the outfield, with Justin Upton hitting 204, and then Joe Adell hitting below 200. So if they go after Michael Brantley, they could really add to the lineup. With Rendon and Trout, you have Shohei Ohtani, maybe even go after an Adam Eaton, someone that could get, at a decent price, a reliable right fielder that can hit and is very fast and a good fielder. He could go without a doubt, and become an option for them. And I think he could be definitely a much-needed bat, but also somebody that if you needed to, again, advance a runner over, get somebody in a scoring position, he's a fast base runner, so he would be a perfect person to have in this lineup. If they can go after some outfielders and definitely try to zero in on, again, Trevor Bauer, who is, again, a California native, then I think they could really put themselves into a good conversation for next season. But we will see how active they become once free agency really picks up, because I'm really, really curious as to what they could do. Because now that I think about it, if they go after somebody like Adam Eaton, somebody they could save a lot of money on and that they would not have to spend a whole lot on, they then could go after somebody like Trevor Bauer. Now, I did see today that Trevor Bauer has rejected the qualifying offer by the Cincinnati Reds, which was $18.9 million. So I think we can all guess that he wants to get paid much more. And for how long, who knows? I mean, he said that he's willing to, sign one-year contracts for the rest of his career, which I think is a little bit, I don't know. I mean, I guess it could work out in his favor. I know I've talked about this before on the show. It could definitely work out in his favor because he could go from a year-to-year basis trying to, earn more money. But, kind of relaying it to almost, I just don't understand why, like a franchise tag, right? In football, for example, and I was listening to, a very high-end agent the other day in the NFL world, and again, I don't mean to cross over sports, but just kind of a relation. With football, if you're a high-end star athlete, the guy was saying, you don't want a franchise tag because something could happen and then you're really out of luck. But if you're kind of a middle-of-the-road player, a good, solid player, nothing crazy, and you get a franchise tag, that's very beneficial. So I know that baseball doesn't really have that, but Trevor Bauer is essentially trying to get essentially what a franchise tag is, just a one-year contract. I don't think it would really work in his favor, because I think that if he were to get injured or something happens or he doesn't perform well, it could really, affect him in the long run, because he has one bad year and then other teams are aware of that and they say, hey, well, I don't want him anymore. He's washed up. He is, old news. Whereas if you're there for 6 or 7 years, if you have a year or two that's bad, you could still have 4 or 5 years that are really good. So then you don't really, again, you'll still make the same amount of money. You could still make a large amount of money, but you would be on the same team, and you would hope that you were on a contending team. So I think ultimately wherever Trevor Bauer goes and, whatever these teams really do, it's going to shift everything. And I think that Trevor Bauer, he's a type of player that is a huge game changer. And he could really, again, he could land on any of these teams, and these teams are going to make big moves. Even with the Brewers, a team that is willing to go all in. They've got talented players. They have star players with Christian Yelich and Lorenzo Cain, in my opinion. And they've got guys that are going to step up in places where they need them to, like a Keston Hiura. So if they go out and get some more pitching, again, Corbin Burns was really good this past year. Obviously, Devin Williams, he's great out of the bullpen. So they've got, for the most part, pieces that they need. They just need, they could go after somebody like Trevor Bauer. It'll just be dependent upon how much he wants to make and how much he's willing and how much the Brewers are willing to pay him. So I think all in all, whatever happens in this free agency, we're going to see a lot of different guys on some new teams. And, we might see a lot of guys start to get re-signed, but I think that we're going to, for the most part, see a lot of new faces in new places next year. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into a discussion on whatever happened to player managers and why they do not exist anymore. Don't go anywhere, anyone, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in our last segment, I got into discussing which teams I think could make the most noise this offseason and which teams could make some big moves in the free agency. I want to close out the show today with a really, really good conversation on something that has always fascinated me, and that is the idea of player managers. Now, this is something that doesn't exist anymore, the idea of a manager who will also lace up and play in the game. There were some very notable player managers in baseball history, though, one of them being a player I've talked about before in Pete Rose. Funny enough, though, Rose was actually the last player manager to really take this position back in 1986, which was around the time he was caught gambling on baseball. I think it happened around 1989, 1988, somewhere in that general area. But the idea of a player manager was actually starting to really phase out well before then. Rose wasn't the only great to ever be a player manager, as the position really revved up in the 70s, with Frank Robinson actually becoming the first African-American manager in baseball history while he was still suiting up for the Indians. Joe Torre was also a player manager for the Mets while he was wrapping up his career as well. So two Hall of Fame baseball players, well, Joe Torre more so probably for managing, and Frank Robinson for playing without question. But again, two greats, two legends, and they were again, like Pete Rose, all three of them were player managers. But as time has gone on, that position has slowly phased out, and they have started to really become non-existent. Players are making more money. Managers are having to really specialize in managing. They're making more money. And not being a manager and player due to the increase in schematics in baseball. I mean, they can't do both. They can't they're not able to coach a game and then go out and at bat. And then if they get on base, well, who knows how long they'll be out on the base path, and they won't be able to relay anything really to their teammates. But it's also been other, outside stuff like handling the media or going over scouting reports. You need someone who is specialized in the game plan of baseball and not necessarily in the playing of baseball. The manager's job is essentially, and he pretty much acts like, it's essentially him as the captain of the ship. So you don't want to have a captain of a ship who is also a deckhand. That wouldn't work. Same thing in baseball. You want a manager, not a manager that is going to also suit up to play. Because, again, how much will a player who's on the team respect that manager? If he notices, hey, I know that, this is my manager, but he's also playing alongside me. So why do I have to listen to him? Who's telling him what to do? Because he's also a player, too. What gives him the, why does he get to be the manager? Now, obviously, you would not do it with somebody that is younger and not as experienced. You're usually doing it with players that are kind of phasing out of their career. They're getting older. They're inching towards retirement, and they're trying to get into being a manager. You're not going to do it when somebody is 30 years old in the prime and height of their career. That just would not happen. But what a lot of people feel tipped the scale on this one and has really eradicated the position of player manager was Rose's scandal with gambling. By being both a player and a manager, he could have even more control over the outcome of the game, with not only playing and actually hitting and fielding himself, but also with decision-making, utilizing subs in certain situations, bringing in certain relief guys. So the impact a player manager on a game has is even more than just a player. Also, just because a manager, they have much more input over both sides of the game. Again, they were able to influence both the coaching and the actual executing and playing of a game. And as a result, it really kind of blurs the lines, I think, of, what is kind of too much and what is kind of, too little almost, in terms of how much input and influence can a manager have and how much can he not have. Can he affect it so much that he goes out and actually plays and does what he's supposed to do? Or is he going to know his role and just be a manager? That's kind of where again, it kind of gets blurred a little bit. With him, with Rose gambling on games, I think it opened people's eyes that by allowing that, you were giving a lot of power to these player managers, allowing them to make crucial decisions that can directly or indirectly affect the game, which ultimately, that opens doors for potential betting. And it's unfortunate that Pete Rose, was caught in the mix of all of that and was, found guilty of all of it, and he did it. But again, he didn't ever bet on his team to lose or anything like that. Again, conversation I've already had, so I'm not going to bring it up again. But bottom line is, that idea of player manager, it is a good point. It definitely kind of opens the doors for certain things to occur that probably should not. Think about it. How much if, go back to 2017 and you're, the Houston Astros and AJ Hinch, who again was a former player himself and was actually not too far removed from being a player, if he's out there and he's starting to now affect the game and he's, again, in on everything on the sign stealing, like we've mentioned earlier in the show, which, again, who knows if he was or not. But, again, besides the point, if he's a player manager and he's able to have that much input onto the game, that, again, he's out there in the field and then he's going into the dugout and letting his players know, hey, look out for this, watch this. Again, it's kind of like having, an extra eye, if you will, because you also not only have a player out on the field, you also have a manager. He's that player manager is acting as two roles. So, it kind of, I don't want to say a cheat code, but it kind of is. Because, again, managers see baseball games differently. But if you're a player and you're a manager, you see the game very differently. You can also see it from a player side and a manager side. So then now you're able to relay everything that you see as a manager over to your players, and it gives that team some added insight over what that other team is doing. But again, what if this came back? That is something that I was very intrigued about. What if this idea came back? Would it work? I really don't think it would. The problem with this would be, simply is, again, if you have that much input from a manager, then it kind of, again, you're instead of getting signs from, somebody on the third baseline, you might be getting signs from a manager on second base, third base. It could even potentially open doors for more sign stealing. Because now your manager is out in the open and he's giving out signs. And again, this happened so long ago, so I am not somebody to ask on what kind of, process was going on with a player manager, if they were actually giving signs out in the field, were they playing every single half inning, were they just batting, were they just fielding, whatever it might be. But and again, at the same time, how could contracts be negotiated? Everything in baseball right now is so expensive. Players, managers, executives, front office people, the list goes on and on. So at what point would the line be drawn and said, hey, that's a little bit too much money. I'm not going to lie. I don't think I'm going to pay you that much. But then they say, well, I'm a player too. You're not going to give me my fair share. I'm a player and a manager. And so that would be the conversation that somebody would have. And I think that would be, again, I think that would give a lot of teams some financial problems. I think it would give a lot of teams some financial headaches because they would have to potentially pay more for the player manager as opposed to just the players. But then that brings up a whole nother problem. Then the players are saying, well, if he's a player, and like I originally said in the beginning of the segment, if he's a player, why is he now telling me what to do if he's just also a manager, though? But he's also a player. Like, it's kind of ambiguous. It goes on both sides. Same thing with being paid. If he's making more money than I am, but he's also lacing them up like I am, why is he making more money if I'm playing better than him just because he's a manager? You should not be paying him on a player scale. You should just pay him on a manager scale. So that would be another issue. How would free agency work? Would you have free agent? Would they be a free agent as a player, but then their managerial contract is not up? Would they be able to, potentially, if they were a player and their player contract was up? And again, that's another thing, contracts. Are you going to sign them as a manager or as a player? How do you work out an agreement between, the team and then the player manager? It's one person, but they're giving two roles. So are they going to have to sign two contracts? It's a very interesting idea, this concept of a player manager or a player coach. Because, I've always seen this in sports, whether it's in baseball or basketball, whatever it might be. It's something that I just don't understand, and I don't really know how it worked and how it was able to fly, really. And again, I guess now in today's age, technology is a lot more prevalent, and so there can be obviously added, outside influence with technology, and then you throw in somebody that's a player and a manager. Again, they did not have the technology they had back then. So that could be a potential kind of, aspect of it, if you will. But how would free agency work? Because, again, we're going into free agency right now, and if somebody has a contract up as a player and then their managerial contract's up, well, do they agree with the player contract and they have to, they can void the managerial contract? Will the managerial contract be almost not an incentive, but an added, kind of piece into the whole puzzle? It just would not, in my opinion, really make sense. How would trades happen? That's a totally different conversation. How would you be able to really go after trading managers? Would you do a manager-player swap? What if somebody was the last year of playing, but they were becoming a manager, and you wanted to trade them before they, were just going straight manager? You wanted to trade them to somebody that still had a player manager that is, maybe a little bit younger, that has got 2 more years in playing, and they're still producing. That other team's going to say, well, why would we just now get this manager, and he's not even producing for us when we had somebody that would, it would kind of throw a lot of things off, I think. But ultimately, I think it's a very interesting concept, and I think that it would possibly work if baseball, again, I think a lot of it falls on the financial aspect. If baseball players were not paid as much as they were, I think you could maybe work something out, and you could potentially have something, figured out in some way or, one way or another. But I just don't see how it would work on a game-by-game basis, on, an in-game basis, on a business side, free agency, contract negotiation. Then you go into the game day aspect of it. Are they putting themselves in the lineup? How often are they putting themselves in the lineup? Are they going to make another teammate / player angry for maybe putting themselves into the lineup over somebody that's been playing well, and they take them out of the lineup, and they say, well, what gives you that right? Because, again, you're also a player. And that's the thing, is that because it holds 2 titles, there's going to be guys that are going to feel that they should not have to necessarily listen, I think, to somebody that is both a player and a manager. that's why I think just having a manager, and also it allows, like I mentioned earlier, managers can now focus on their job specifically as a manager. They don't have to worry about, hey, if I go up to bat and I get out, that's an out for my team. That's a missed base runner, a missed potential run. A lot of different things could happen. And I'm not focusing on my managerial skills. What if a player is not playing well, he's 0 for 3, and it affects his decision-making a little bit when he's a manager. So, that kind of also has to get factored in. And being able to just have managers focus specifically on their managerial positions, and that's it, makes all the sense in the world. Because then players can focus on what they have to do, managers can focus on what they have to do, and the two sides do not have to get blended together. And again, you kind of have this mess almost, if you will, of who's in charge and who's not. Is he in charge? How much respect? Now, somebody like Pete Rose, I think it would vary on who the person was. There are some players, managers in today's age that I feel like they would be probably fairly well-respected player managers. Joe Girardi. If Joe Girardi was still playing and he was a coach, I think that guys would probably listen to him as both of it, as both of a manager and a player. People would be a little bit, because he's got respect as both a player and he's got respect as a manager. He's done well at both sides of the coin. He's not necessarily incredible, not a Hall of Famer, but he was good at both aspects of the game. Somebody else, maybe Craig Counsell, somebody that was a pretty decent player in his day, and he's become a pretty decent manager. He would maybe get a little bit more respect than others. But I can't really think of many other potential player-manager candidates in today's age that could maybe do well. And maybe Alex Cora, he's not too far removed from playing if he was still a player-manager. Probably him and AJ Hinch, I would say, would be the two options I would give. Because, you look at guys like Joe Madden, he's well past playing, and Tony La Russa, same thing, well past playing. Rick Renteria is not on a team anymore. So there's guys that are clearly kind of out of the mix of it, and they're not going to be a part of it. But there's also guys that could maybe do well at it. Regardless, though, I don't think it's something that could really conceptually work in today's age just because of the amount of money that's into baseball, also the amount of statistics and kind of analytics, and also just strategy in baseball also. It's too focused right now, and to have somebody focus both on the playing and the managerial side, it would just be too much. And there would be overcompensation of one side, and as a result, the other side would not, the manager part of it would be great, but the player aspect would not, and vice versa. And again, the emotions of a player would maybe seep into the emotions of a manager, and as it being the same person, it could really affect the entire game plan, not only in the field, but also off the field in the dugout too. So an idea that is very interesting, but ultimately, I don't think it'll ever work, and I don't think it'll ever really come back unless somehow, some way, baseball gets, a salary cap, which I don't ever see that happening either. So ultimately, an interesting thought, but it will never reoccur probably ever again. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would really appreciate that as well. Thank you for listening, as always, and until next time, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.